Welcome. This is the Public Affairs Forum, sponsored by the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin, Texas. My name is Luther Elmore. We hold these public affairs forums most Sundays here at our church site, 4700 Grover Avenue in north central Austin. We invite you to come and join us so that you can hear our speakers, and if you have any specific questions, you can ask them. We've been holding these forums since 1954, the year this church first incorporated. Today we're very happy to have with us Mr. Stuart Sullivan. Stuart is a veteran recording engineer and producer, owner of Wire Recording Studio at the Mosaic Sound Collective, and he'll speak on a broad range of subjects concerning the professional recording world. He comes from a long history of activity in Austin. He has recorded gold and Grammy-winning albums. For 30 years, he was chief engineer at Arlen Studio and Pernalis Records, associated with Willie Nelson. So we're delighted to have Stuart with us today. Stuart.
Thank you all for making it. I'm Stuart Sullivan, obviously, and I'll just start from a simple point. I moved down here as a carpetbagger from Indiana many, many years ago, back when, being a Yankee was kind of a bad thing. I don't think anyone even recognizes what a Yankee is at this stage of the game. But, I grew up in a small town in Indiana, very comparable to, say, College Station, because it had a large university, Purdue University, ag and engineering. And it was also a time pre-internet and pre-even cable TV, for that matter. So sources of information were very limited to the nightly news, the newspaper, and that was about it, dinner table discussion. But, we read a lot of books, and that was a source of information, a way to learn, a way to see the big world. But it was all kind of filtered through this small town mentality that I had, that I learned in West Lafayette. And I remember at one point learning about a radio station in Chicago called WXRT. And XRT was a station that would play like a Bach organ fugue, then they'd go to Inagata Davida, then maybe Take Five, and then they would play like a Zeppelin song. And it was by design, as I later found out, a whiplash station. And the thing that it showed to me was that from this kind of narrow thought process and perception that I had in West Lafayette, it was the first time I'd seen a window to the real world, this big world outside of mine. Now, naturally, I assimilated it within that kind of narrow thinking that I had grown up with. But it was a moment that changed things for me. And as I got older, I realized that maybe I wanted to go to a bigger place. There was something more for me here, something more for me there. So I found that I didn't like the cold weather. Actually, I hate the cold weather. And I had some friends here in Austin, and I thought this would be a great place. It's like, if I'm ever going to get to be a hippie, now's the chance. And so I came down here and I grew my hair out and I tried to be a hippie. And, for me, I'm a little bit hyperactive, so it didn't work out. But it got me to Austin. And Austin was the next big window opening up. Because even when I moved here 30 odd years ago, it was a little town. And it was kind of simple. But it was a little town that looked beyond its own borders and saw a bigger world. And so, for the second time in my life, I perceived that there was things larger than me out there. Not that I really wanted to deal with them, because I was just worried about having a good time and getting the next job. But it did plant the seed that there was a bigger world out there, and I appreciated that very much. And within a couple of years of moving here, I worked hard, and I found myself with two very iconic Austin institutions. I was working for a young man named Willie Nelson, who seemed to represent Austin in a way, but also represented a big world. And so, yet again, my myopic little perception of the world got a little bit bigger. And I still wanted to see it through my own personal eyes, not through anybody else's. But being around Willie, your world expands. The second institution that I got involved with was a young man named Clifford Antone, who just finished up a vacation, shall we say, a federally funded vacation. And He was out and he was coming back with a vengeance. He was going to make a mark in Austin. He was going to put Austin on the map. And that developed the Antones of the 80s, the early and mid 80s, where things took off. He started the record company, we made records, he had all sorts of great artists coming in, and I got involved in this world that was not just national, but an international cadre of musicians that traveled. It was the first time that I was really part of an organization that was largely international, not just colloquial, not just a little small town, but a bigger world, and it fascinated me to no end. And I was so glad that it lasted for 5 or 6 years before another vacation was had and things kind of shut down. But, these processes took me from someone being a small town, worried about surviving, worried about my next job, worried about what's right in front of me, Where am I living? Am I going to get to go to this party? Do I have enough money to pay rent? The immediacy of what life oftentimes is for people. And that was fine for me. And I worked through this, and as it went on, I had an opportunity to move to England. And I took it. And I moved to London and worked there for about a year. And again, another moment in time where myopic little vision kind of exploded into a bigger world. I mean, I'm living in Europe. I'm traveling around in Europe. I'm seeing a whole new universe, and that universe is a lot older than Indiana, where I came from. In Indiana, you see a house that's 100 years old, and oh my Lord. And, over in Europe, you're seeing things that are 1,200 years old or more. And this, again, allowed me to see myself in a bigger world. Because growing up and moving forward, and even to this day, there is an element of me always kind of having blinders on and seeing a small little world and not seeing much beyond my world. But there are these episodes that I've talked about, Willie and Antones and England, and even moving to Austin, were bits and pieces that gave me a spark but never really lit the fire for me. And I worked in this environment, and I traveled. I started having success, so I traveled a lot. And next thing I know, I'm part of the music industry, and people are taking you out to dinner in Laurel Canyon and the stuff that you kind of fantasize about that are going to happen. And it's wonderful, and it was marvelous. On the other hand, we were still relatively narrowly focused on getting this record done because I didn't always work with the most stable of artists, shall we say. And a lot of our time was spent just trying to keep them focused and sober and together enough to get something done. I'm being honest here. So each of these steps gave me a view, but not enough of a view for me to pursue off into that other world. I stayed in my kind of like myopic little world. And it wasn't until I decided to open up my own business. Basically, my success was waning. As I like to say, my batteries were losing their charge. And I was coming back to the real world, which was fine because I loved coming back to Austin. I've always loved living here. I have a wonderful collection of friends here from all over, friends from high school. I have a large collection of high school friends from Indiana still down here, as well as from every single stage of my life. I have been able to acquire and maintain friends from there. So, my base of friends started getting quite broad, but my mindset was still quite narrow. What does Stuart want? What is Stuart getting? What is Stuart going to do? And when I opened up my own studio, I was extremely worried because I'd been based out of a couple of rooms. They talked about Petronelli's, Willie's place, and a place called Arlen. But those were very kind of insular deals. And so they kept you thinking small and thinking simple. And you were discouraged from thinking on a grand scale. Well, I opened up my own studio, and something amazing happened. People that I knew but that I didn't think necessarily liked me or respected me started coming out of the woodwork to come work with me. People like, a gentleman named Stephen Bruton. I don't know if anybody knows, but he is a legendary musician and songwriter who mentored a lot of the strong musicians out there today. And Stephen went out of his way to make sure and do records with me, to get people to come and use me as their endorsee. The new tube mic, well, get Stuart, he'll do it. And he supported me in so many ways, not just giving me business, but giving me stature in the industry. And other people, Roscoe Beck came and started working with me, and I just noticed all these folks who would kind of keep me at arm's length before were now embracing me and embracing me tightly. And it took me a little while to understand that they had seen me within the confines of this other entity, and there was some darkness in that entity, to be honest with you. And they didn't want part of that darkness, and as long as I was part of that, they kind of kept their distance. But as soon as I left, they embraced me as part of Austin's music community. And that to me was really the primary tipping point. I mentioned that all these things happened, but I kept my myopic picture. But when I realized by example that these folks were embracing me as part of a community, that I was not an island, I wasn't a guy by myself over here, but that I was part of this community, and that they respected me, they liked me, and they trusted me enough to keep me and to make sure that I was part of this community because they believed that I had something to contribute. And this was something I really never understood or accepted prior to this. And once I saw that, it kind of just removed the veil, and everything started looking different to me. And at that point, I realized that these people have gone out of their way to support me because we are a community and we need each other. And it didn't take long for me to understand that I have an obligation in return to look out for my people and support them and try to promote them. And that was really my first recognition that I am a member of a community, and a member of a community reaps the benefits and also contributes to that community. And that was the beginning. And at that stage of the game, I had started doing more freebies for people that good cause. Doing a free song for this guy because he's contributed to ham benefit. Simple things, not major like global things, but one-on-one, because that's right, at that stage of the game, that's really all I understood how to do, was one-on-one favors back and forth. But you do one-on-one favors with enough people who are all part of the community, and you're starting to support the community. And to me, that changed me personally, because I really, really felt like I'm a member of this community on a full force. And Stephen Bruton was clear to me the responsibilities that carried. And that carried supporting other people, but it also supported looking into the future and trying to find ways to make our community better, to battle the problems that we have. Stephen, for instance, battled addiction with people. He was a 12-step guy, and he sponsored so many people. And that is an important part of maintaining and building our community, because addiction has been such a scourge for people. And I really, really respected him for how he took it seriously and took his role as a mentor to people very seriously, whether it was through counseling in addiction or whether it was just through teaching them about business and professionalism. And you would think after all these years and having hit records and having, worked with Willie, that I would have a better grip on professionalism. But I didn't. I was being successful. I was making money. Life was quite good, as a matter of fact. But I didn't fully understand what it meant to be professional. And with his help and with some introspection, I was able to start to take steps forward with that. And one of those steps was, we didn't have a Grammy organization here in town. And a gentleman named Ray Benson, he's a very tall man. And Ray started putting together the first Grammy organization. And I thought, he goes, Stuart, I want you to join. And I go, well, are we voting members? What do we do? He goes, no, we're just going to give them money and maybe one day we'll get to be members. It's like, all right, Ray, I trust you. as much as you can trust it. But and so I joined that. I joined a larger organization to be a member of that, and that was wonderful. And in the meantime, I continued to work with different pockets of people. I talked about Antones. I talked about Willie. I got involved with a punk rock band that I'll just say it's a punk rock band, but got them to kind of help, contribute and think about things. I started, helping raising money and raising artists to do suicide prevention things, just social interaction, because social interaction works both for everybody as well as for the music community. And these were somewhat diffuse actions. I didn't really know what to do. I didn't have a plan to follow that would show me exactly the steps I needed to take, but it seems like, hey, social good is good. Campaign for a representative that you believe in, or give money to HAM or SIMS, these organizations that developed here in town back in the 90s and 2000s that support musicians by giving them low-cost health care or free mental health care. And I started seeing what other people were doing, because I wanted to give more. And I started seeing what other people were doing and this and that. And then out of the blue, of all people, my banker, the president of my bank, called me up and said, "Stuart, we would like you to be a part of the Austin Music Foundation. Would you consider it?" I go, well, what do you guys do? So it sounds kind of boring to me, but sure. So I showed up, and the Music Foundation is an educational service. Every month, they put together a program of education based at beginning level musicians, whether it's, taxes and lawyers, whether it's touring, whether it's promotion, whether it's how to make a record. They do this every month. They're tireless about it. They work very hard. I joined in and started to bring the people that I knew, because I have such a broad range of people that I know and can reach out to. I was able to bring in a lot of great people to these programs and help them strengthen their job, as well as try to kind of focus the organization to be more effective. We need to videotape these things so you have an archive of all these great speakers you have. And bit by bit, it still felt very constraining, but I could see how these nonprofits kind of have a very important role. And so when the next one came up, an organization called Black Fret showed up. They are based on kind of the basic theme behind Black Fret is that a bunch of members join and contribute money. Those members and the advisors, they nominate artists. And then 20 artists are nominated, and over the course of the next 9 months, there are little house concerts and parties where, in an intimate setting at a reasonable hour without too much volume, largely business people can go and watch these artists. At the end of the year, we all vote. The top 10 vote. We have a benefit at the Black Ball over at the Paramount, and we give away, the very first year, we gave away $10,000 awards to the winners and $3,000 awards to the losers. Now, 5 years later, we're giving $20,000 away to the winners and $5,000 away to the losers. So it's a source not only to get money to the artists, but more importantly, it's making this thing happen where business people who tend to have a little bit more money but not the cool factor, and artists who have the cool factor but not the money, it's a match made in heaven. And so what we're seeing is lots and lots of the artists that go through the Black Fret events are finding themselves, whether they win or lose, they're making good money, because now they do 2 private parties at $15,000 a pop, and they're doing a corporate event for $20,000. So, hey, I lost Black Fret, but I made $40,000 anyways. And it is that combining of the music and the business community that was genius. And it expanded both communities. Now the business community is far more engaged and more active, and feels like they're more engaged and active in the music community. And the music people are recognizing the value and the humanity and the reasonable and the benefits of interacting with the business community. So what we've got is we've taken these 2 communities And by overlapping them, we've made them 3 times the size of each individual one. So that was a great thing for me to understand and learn about, because it showed me the power of a plan and a long-term plan that you work with, how it can create a much larger return than the individual pieces. There's the gestalt, for lack of a better term, that happens there. So seeing that was, once again, eye-opening for me. And I'm going to use that term over and over, because from when I was very little, and now I'm kind of old, I'm still getting my eyes opened. It's not like I hit a point and said, I see everything, I'm omniscient. It's a process that will never stop, I assume. But that process taught me that there is a bigger need in this community. And for me, I'm focusing it because my people aren't white people, they're not northern people, my people are musicians. Whatever your race, creed, color, belief system, if you're a musician, that's who we are. Those are my people, and I believe that very strongly. So in an effort to provide as much for those people as possible, we started looking at other opportunities. And the next one that came my way, and it came my way in a very classic modern Austin method. And that modern Austin method is, I was renting a place right down in South Lamar and Gibson, and I was paying $1,600 a month. And new owners got it, and when the rent went up to $8,500 a month, I became another casualty of the classic Austin problem of gentrification, and I had to go. And my choices were very quickly moved to Buda, where there's a place I could buy that would have been a good investment and was very cool and would have worked great for me. Or I had this opportunity to be the first tenant in a dilapidated old juvenile detention center. And looking at things, I realized that the potential for this juvenile detention center, what we now call the Mosaic Sound Collective, was intense. There's a gentleman behind it named Dan Redmond, who had been devising and thinking and hustling and meeting for about 3 years before he got the lease on that place. And he and I talked, and I said, I'm in. I believe in you. I believe in what you're doing. And what we're doing is creating a music hub that can be a cornerstone of a musical community. The business is 25,000 square feet. The idea is that we have a performance wing, a production wing, a technology wing, a rehearsal wing, and a kind of generalized, education, private wing sort of stuff. But we have this building completely full at this stage of the game of music-based industries. And he showed me that we were not going to survive unless we worked within the political system. And I would already become aware of the need for the Austin music community to have a role in the political system. Because, as you look at all these other industries, whether you're talking high tech or real estate or anything else, they generate money, they get together, and then they have a lobbying firm, and they are strong members of the community, and they at least are battling for their place. And music had nothing of the sort. We had South by Southwest and C3 who could scoop off, the lion's share of good stuff. But the rest of us were like 10,000 ants going in 10,000 directions. And there's not a lot of organization in that. So within the concept of Mosaic, we have been developing a music hub that is keyed on, first and foremost, to avoid the biggest danger that Austin has been confronting all of its arts communities. Every single arts, people in general, but the arts communities specifically, are all challenged by gentrification and money. It's the thing. I think the Vortex still exists, but the Savage Vanguard Theater's gone. So if you like dance or experimental theater, there's a diaspora right now. They're not getting ready to leave. They are leaving Austin because the opportunities for them to be able to have a place to hold an event is dying. And so they're struggling. And music, by lack of being organized or coherent, is also losing its place. So the Mosaic was kind of a centerpiece to build a political platform to advocate for the arts, not just music, although certainly music specifically, but arts in general. And within the context of that, I somehow found myself appointed to the Austin Music Commission, which is a commission that basically deals with a lot of pointless stuff, but every once in a while some significant stuff that then we give our opinions to our council members and meetings. And oftentimes a lot of the stuff that we don't deal with is what I'm talking to my council member and Kitchens about. So this whole organization sees itself as a way to be able to be a development hub for artists. We have 6 acres around us that we have been working very hard to get low-income housing for artists. That's a trick because, what about widows and children? Well, there's no answer. If someone says, what about widows and children? You hang your head and say, you're right. But in this case, because the seed money comes for a grant for arts, we are able to focus that one on artists. So if our world were to come true, we are looking at funding from a couple of sources to help us turn our mortgage or our lease into a mortgage and create this environment that has low-income housing. It brings young artists in, kind of teaches them by being part of, like interns within all the business entities within the Mosaic. Some of them will be good enough to keep working there, and then they kind of come out. So the Mosaic is like a washing machine, for lack of a better term, in the sense that we are bringing young artists in, giving them a broad opportunity of education for all different sorts of disciplines in art, whether it's management or booking, or whether it's rehearsal, or whether it's studios, or whether it's performance, all the things I described. I think we're going to have TuneCore, which is another online music organization. So we already have this wide variety. We're letting interns in already. They can live in the low-income housing. And the process is it's not a dead end. It's not like, okay, you move in here, you'll be here the rest of your life. You got a job here. No. This is an organization that is designed to be churning things up. You come in, you learn your thing, you take part in it, you can live for cheap for a while, and you come out and then you go forth and be fruitful. Basically, it's not a end of the line job. We are basically another envisioning of like a college or an educational process that work, live, learn all in one place. Colleges don't really address the music industry in any sort of significant way. Schools in general don't. I have seen a lot of the recording schools that I don't support because I think that they're just they're money grabs. And this is a situation, like I say, that allows people to kind of move in, develop, and move out. So the Mosaic, right now at this stage of the game, is one of the grander visions that I am participating in that are this long evolution from me growing up in West Lafayette, Indiana, watching the nightly news and checking out a Three Dog Night record from the library, and that was my whole universe. And my universe keeps hopefully expanding larger and larger to include more supportive businesses. Because the way I see it is that we have an unusual business environment here. It collapsed 8 years ago. It collapsed before that, but they finally acknowledged that it collapsed 8 years ago. We don't sell records. We used to sell records. The way I would describe it is we used to sell records that were a commodity because we'd make these records and sure, 4 out of 5 of them didn't sell and went down the toilet. But Some of them sold and broke even or made a little money. And every once in a while, one of them or two of them would sell like crazy. And there's like a river of money you dive in until it dries up. But it really created this opportunity to make a decent living. And when the potential for return on investment is there, a commodity, the investment is there. So we had huge investment. And I used to, on the major label side, I used to work between $100,000 to $500,000 a record. I don't even know what that means now. That is so distant in my memory. If I get a big record, it might be 50 grand. So the amount of shrinkage has been unbelievable. And what we do now is we make promotional material that we give away for free. So that aspect of my particular business is dead and not likely to come back. And so the need to look beyond just the studio world and see all these other avenues that I'm helping to try to create became more important to me. And as most things, it became important to me when I had to deal with it personally. I mean, I would like to be a very altruistic person, but, my altruism comes from self-need too. That's oftentimes the foundation of enlightened self-interest is another form of altruism. So now that I look out over the world, I'm looking at all these things that could make Austin a better, more stable music community. I look out over at Nashville, or I look at New York, all these other places, and I see, how do they survive? I mean, the business goes like this, and Austin goes like this. How does Nashville and New York and LA, kind of mitigate that and do this? Well, they have certain types of industries that generate money through thick and through thin. And it became very clear, well, that's what we need. Well, we are fortunate because whether you like it or not, we have ACL Fest just down the road right now, and we have South by Southwest. We are a powerful festival town, and it brings a lot of money, whether it's through the actual festivals here, or whether it's South by Southwest farming out, or C3 farming out and having people travel all over the world to put on Lollapalooza, but half of those people live in Austin and their paychecks come back to Austin. So we do have one leg at the table, which is the festival industry. And we need more. And I know that I and others are looking hard to create at least two more. Three-legged table's better than a one-legged table. And we're looking at something maybe in publishing that could possibly happen. We're also looking at a unique situation where there is a great deal of back and forth between Monterey and Austin. And Monterey is a hub for all sorts of Latin, South American, and Central American music coming through there. So there are a number of folks that I know have deep ties into Monterey and go there on a regular basis. And we are right now hoping that perhaps if we could get a little publishing thing going and we could have a stronger tie to Monterey, that would be three legs of a table. And we would have at least some stability. Certainly there's a desire for more, and certainly there's no guarantee that either of those will come to fruition. But when it comes to looking at a big picture and how something can work on a long-term goal, that is a very viable formula. And that is the evolution of where I came from 35 years ago in Indiana with my little blinders on. I mean, I wish that I could say that I am a visionary from day one. I'm not even a visionary yet, but what I am is a person that really cares a tremendous amount about our community. not just about individuals, but about our community in general. And I am trying to take steps in conjunction with a number of other people who deserve more credit than I do, to be able to build the foundational steps that allow Austin to not just be the live music capital of the world, but to become a stable music industry that provides long-term, middle-class musical jobs. And it's been, like I say, it's been a great evolution for me, and I am really thankful for all the misery I've gone through to be able to have this evolution. But it is nonetheless something that I share more and more with others. And the more I share this with others who are equally or more committed, and most of them are smarter and more, connected than I am. And as a team, I believe we can create an even larger community. So a small community of people that have this vision are trying to help a larger community. And I'm going to use the word community every opportunity I can, because we are inextricably linked. Our music community is linked to every other art community. All of our arts community are linked to our social, our business, and our human community, and our spiritual community. And this interaction, this willingness to build these communities with a perception and a recognition that there are other communities that we should naturally connect with and be part of, is how I see us going forward. I mean, it's my vision, or it's not mine, but it's a vision that I subscribe to for Austin's, continued greatness as an artistic, as a cultural, and as just a lovely place to live. So that's largely where my shtick is coming from. If anybody has any questions.
I don't quite understand the transformation of the music businesses. You hit on it a little bit when you said we used to make and sell records, but we don't do that anymore. Could you talk more about how that whole transformation has happened and what's happening now and what you see the future to be?
Absolutely. Back 25 years ago, when an organization called Napster, some of you may be familiar with, first came about, and it was file sharing. And many people saw it as the greatest thing, and a lot of people saw it as the death. At that time, as a parallel, to describe the parallel, the movie industry was facing a very similar problem. Now, they had the advantage of, if you wanted to download a movie, it was a gigabyte or more. And back then, that was a hard thing to transfer. I mean, transfer rates, I can transfer a gigabyte in a couple of seconds. But back then, not so much. And so they had a little bit of an advantage. But the movie industry said, this is a problem. We need to get in front of it. And so they immediately worked a deal where there was a mechanism to pay for movies, but it wasn't onerous, and that by paying this fee, you could do digital transfers. But the bottom line is, all these years later, we're still paying money to rent a movie. So that income stream is still very, very viable for the movie industry. Whereas in audio, and in the music world, most of the music companies had been relying on catalog sales. Once CDs came out, they started getting all this money, easy money from catalog sales on CD, and they didn't put the time and the effort into new music. And so new music kind of struggled, but it was hidden by all these catalog sales. And then when digital downloads came, they were arrogant and ignorant enough that they decided that first they stuck their head in the sand and said, this isn't happening, this isn't happening, this isn't happening, this isn't happening. And then their next reply was to, we'll sue grandma. She downloaded something. And they did. They literally sued a grandma, and they sued a couple other kids. And this was a genius way to, win back the hearts and minds of your constituents by suing them. And that was pretty much the last straw. At that stage of the game, they hadn't even begun a negotiation to do like an iTunes thing. And it was lost. At that stage, music pretty much lost their opportunity to monetize music in any way, shape, or form. And iTunes came on, which was better, but that was just a halfway step, because the amount of money that you got from a single download was a fraction. And before, you bought albums. You'd spend $15 on an album, and the band would get $1 or whatever back from that, or $2 or whatever, and that disappeared. They stopped. iTunes helped, but what really happened is that everybody with their CDs, they just started passing it around. I did too. And it became a freebie. And the idea that music costs money was lost at that moment. And so that's where the music industry largely collapsed, because their primary source of income disappeared. And once it was lost, it was lost. There was really no going back. And, they've come up with, well, what about Apple iTunes? Well, they pay a fraction. And now there's streaming, whether it's, Spotify or Pandora or whatever. And that's not helping. That being said, here's the conundrum. So it might surprise you guys, but I'm still quite a music fan. I love it. I listen to it all I can. I listen to it at work. I get in my car, I listen to it in the car. My wife and kid go to sleep, I go out in the car and sit in the car and listen to music again. I love it. And I have Spotify, and I intentionally bought the most expensive Spotify, the family plan, for $20 a month, because at least there's some money going towards it, and at least their bylaws say that 75% of that money has to go towards paying royalties. So when you see that somebody has 17 million spins and they got $1,000, well, that's because they had 16.5 million spins and got $100 from free people, and then they had, 500,000 spins from paid subscribers, and that's where the other money comes from. So I want to be able to, on my phone, and I have it right here, and it's charged up, and later on I'll be doing it, I go on Music Jags all the time. Why wouldn't I want almost every song ever written at the touch of a finger on my phone? I know it's hurting my business, but how can I say no to that? I go on Music Jags that, over the last couple of years that I would have never done. Right now I'm on a real 70s kind of like Spinners, Temptations, Bar-Kays. You just put it in and then they fill it in for you, and it's great. So, it's been made very difficult to actually want to pay money for music. And so I don't really see the future of record sales. What's been taken over is touring and merchandise. Those are the two sources of income that most artists make their big money on. And I sadly joke about this. I get the trade magazines, like the audio trade magazines, and us recording guys used to be the kings. You'd open it up, there'd be a big console on the cover, and all the ads were big shiny recording consoles. It was so cool. And now I open them up, and it's all about a live console. It's all about live mics. It's like recording guys with retarded stepchild now, and and the concert people are the kings. And so that's where the money ends up being for the most part. And, I'm glad that there is money in there. I'm glad that there's money being made, but my industry, which is the recording industry, which has a glorious and beautiful history, is, as an example, in this town, the last 5 major recording studios that have opened up have spent somewhere between $1 to $6 million each. None of them will ever do so much as to break even. So the fact that we don't have that income coming in, and the fact that Austin is a trendy, cool guy town, and that there are people with great wealth that want to be cool and don't mind spending a couple $1 million to be cool. That's what we're facing. So I don't really know the solution. Personally, I still love to make records, and so I am still stuck trying to get blood out of a turnip.
So I have a follow-up question.
Yeah.
So I have a follow-up to that. So it seemed like musicians worked with recording studios and producers and labels, people like that. But
Yeah.
come along Garth Brooks and Taylor Swift and people like that who kind of took the whole business on themselves. How does that work? What did they do different? And there's a singer from Indiana, Carrie Newcomer, who does the same thing with her music business. How does that work for musicians, and is it productive and viable for them?
Well, there is a slice at the top. And Nashville has been extremely effective and smart at managing their artists to be able to control who and what gets up there on top. And if you are Taylor Swift or someone like that, you make money in a lot of different ways, because they look at a picture and they go, okay, well, we used to make most of our money through song publishing and through record sales, and then we made a good chunk through touring. Well, now you add in all of these people have heavy endorsements with other, a clothing line, a perfume line, a lifestyle line. There are all a lot of the rappers were very smart with this early on. They came out with vitamin water, 50 Cent came out with the vitamin water and made a fortune. And P. Diddy came out with Ciroc, or whatever, I don't know if that's the right name, but some sort of a vodka, I think. And what you find is that they have become media entities rather than just entertainment entities. So if you are successful enough, you can then, endorse all these other products, or you can generate more money. Then you can get, you might get on American Idol, where you can be a judge on American Idol and get paid $1 million an episode or whatever. So a lot of the money that was lost in recording studios is being attempted to be made up in other more traditional marketing methodology.
First of all, just examples of making all the collateral, all the country guys who have their whiskeys, and their bars and such came to mind.
Tequilas.
Yeah, right. But you use the phrase, what you're basically doing is promotional recordings. So and then there's like the 3% top of the Taylor Swifts and all the really popular ones, but all the other musicians, they're making their living by going around the country playing in clubs based on those promotional that gets on YouTube or wherever, where I'm curious about who's playing at some bar downtown, and I'll look them up there. I mean, that's how they make their living. I mean, that's kind of, it's discouraging, I would think, for
very much so, and
for the people who want to be professionals at it. But where's it come from? Yeah.
Well, and the two problems with that is that, if you're in a really big band, you might get a decent paycheck. You might be getting $100,000 a year or so to play bass in Kenny Chesney, give or take, and that's great. But because there's a woman that I know that's been playing with Kenny for a while. But the unfortunate reality, and this is with everybody, is when you have artists artists have to try to remain permanently young. And a primary technique for remaining permanently young, besides, having stem cell injections every day, is to have young band members. So if you're a band member and you're making your living as a band member, this is great because I'm 23 and I'm out here and it's cool. And then I'm, 27 and it's cool, I'm rugged. And then I'm over here, I've been with you for 5 years, I'm getting max money and my hair is falling out. Oh, I better get hair plugs. And now my face is wrinkling. And, life goes on and we get old and we stop looking young and they stop wanting you to play with them because they're looking for someone that makes them look young, and you get old and you're out of here, buddy. And it's brutal, but it's real. And then there is the mid-level guys. There's a thing in the phenomena here called Texas country. And it's very, very popular. And it's amazing how much money can be generated out of it, because there are literally probably hundreds of artists out there doing it. And there's lots of booking agents and there's lots of touring artists. But these guys are getting paid, $150 a night to go on tour, maybe $200 or $300 if they're in a big band. And they're off on tour for 120 days a year. So now they've made, $40,000. And then, boom, they're dead in the water for 6 months trying to make a few extra dollars. And when you're gone all the time, your connections kind of dry up. So if I learned this years ago when I was on the road, I would be gone for 6 months. And then I'd plop back in Austin for a couple months and I'd want to work. And it's like everyone forgot me. Or not necessarily forgot me, but they just, he's gone. So you have to go around and go to all the shows and all the clubs and make sure everyone knows you're here. And by the time you get a little bit of momentum going again, you go back on the train and you're gone for another couple of months. So that becomes a very challenging, method, because you're stuck with this thing where people you are getting a modest living and you're on the road all the time, which gets to be tough after a while, especially if you want to have a family, any sort of a family or relationship. It becomes a very challenging thing. So we do have this kind of sizable pool of talent that is touring through Texas areas doing this Texas country thing, but it would be far from what I was going to refer to as the musical middle class. That's our best course of musical middle class, who are making, $40,000 a year and gone half the time. And I applaud them. Good for them. That's great. But, if you want to have people with families and long-term stability, you need more money and you need it to be more, consistent. And you need things like health insurance, because almost every single one of these people that we've talked about doesn't have health insurance. My wife and I both have small businesses, and we're on the market getting a new, more expensive, less functional health insurance every year. And that's not the environment that creates a strength and a stable long term.
So it seems like Austin incentivized a lot of businesses to come here through the Chamber of Commerce, which we support through our taxes.
Right.
And those businesses kind of pushed out the traditional Austin keep it weird music and art scene that really helped Austin to flourish. And since you're on the Music Commission, do you have any ideas about how we could kind of go the other direction with our taxpayer money, for example, or how we could get the Chamber of Commerce to help incentivize the arts?
Yeah, I have not had any contact really with the Chamber of Commerce about this, but the city is trying to address that. They have a program called 380, which has been really the same program that they've used to incentivize to bring in outside businesses. And we have been working on the commission to be able to break it down into smaller pieces. So we don't need $6 million because we're not going to provide 40 jobs. We're trying to break it down where we can have more manageable use of that mechanism, the 380 mechanism, that does help support, give, stipends and does, help, make it easier for a business to stay in place. So through the 380, we are in that process. We're not, it's not resolved yet, but there has been a lot of back and forth about how this is going to work. And whenever the staff talks to us and gives a presentation about this, we go, well, how would that work for a theater group that needs to, things along those lines. So there is an effort, a direct effort being made to utilize that mechanism to help support our sorts of things, including things like if there are buildings that are not being used, that are owned by the city and not being used, but then you get into the politics of almost every building is owned by one, like that's the Parks and Recreation, that's the emergency services, that's the police, police department has an old HEB or an academy, and you have to work within each individual division's needs because they technically own that building. So I have found that I appreciate very much what the city is doing and that they are trying very hard, and there are some staff people that are very, very focused and hardworking and committed to this. But I also know that my experience over the last year and a half or so with the city I'm becoming more of a fan of private equity because it happens quicker, faster, more directly, and more easily. And I also believe that as many of these entities that can should pay their way. This is the thing I want to end on. My last thing is that, look, there are things like HAM and Music Foundation. Whoa, sorry about that. HAM and the Music Foundation and SIMS and stuff, that they need city support, and I'm all for the city giving them a stipend every year. But I've become more of a fan, and the Mosaic is one of these things where we need a big chunk of money now, and then let us go, and we'll sink or swim. Because I like the idea of independence as much as possible. And I think that the more of these music businesses that can have a certain degree or a complete degree of independence, the stronger we'll be. It's tougher for these entities to survive with that. But I think long term, having seen all the labyrinth of necessity for the city, the more you can avoid that, the better off you can. So 380, though, to answer your question, is that's a mechanism we are trying to refine to specifically adapt to music and theater.
Stuart Sullivan, thank you for being with us today. Thank you for your work in the city of Boston on behalf of musicians. And once again, thank you, and many happy tunes in the future.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.